Well, today we have a terrific presentation for you from the EPA's Office of Design for the Environment. And we're very fortunate to have Clive Davies, who's the Chief of the Design for the Environment Office, doing our presentation. And he will be joined later by Bradley Grams, who is the TSCA coordinator for Region 5 as well at EPA. So Clive Davies is the Design for the Environment Chief of Design in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He has led the DFE program through the development of methodologies to inform substitution to safer chemicals, including alternative assessments for safer flame retardants in furniture and plastics, in BPA in thermal paper, and for phthalates in a range of applications. His group also conducts life cycle assessments to explore alternatives to lead solder in electronics and nanoscale innovation in batteries. DFE partners, including industry, states, and environmental groups, protect the environment and human health through actions they take based on DFE partnerships. So I'm going to turn it over to Clive now. And go ahead, Clive. Take it away.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for the very nice introduction. And I want to say specifically thank you to you for your participation in some of the work that we do. And I figure there are probably partners of DFEs on the line, and I want to say thank you to you for working with us. Probably the most important part of what goes on at Design for the Environment is our interaction with stakeholders, and if folks didn't want to work with us, there wouldn't be much point in us doing the work that we do. So what I offered Lynn a few months ago, actually, as a title for this presentation was how the work we do drives green chemistry. I feel like that's pretty appropriate. I feel like everything that we try to do at DFE, it's all about using the technical tools that have been developed over the course of 30-plus years to implement the Toxic Substances Control Act. How do you turn those toward moving toward safer chemistry? How do you identify the safer chemicals? How do you reward the product manufacturers who make safer chemicals? How do you make those chemicals known and available? And how do you encourage chemical manufacturers to make the safest chemicals possible? That's the way that I think of our job here, and doing that as efficiently as possible, and doing that in a way that supports the priorities of this office, but that listens to the folks on the outside about outside of the agency, that is, about what we ought to be doing. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information on our program. And I'm hoping that this is going to be a useful presentation, and that it'll encourage even more folks to work with us and to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Two basic areas of focus. The first one is the alternatives assessments that we're doing right now for chemicals that the agency has identified as priority chemicals. We were calling them action plan chemicals until recently, but we're using a broader term, priority chemicals, that will encompass those that were put out under action plans, and then hopefully soon another set of chemicals that the agency will concentrate its work on. I'll tell you about the priority chemicals, and I'll tell you about the criteria that we use for alternatives assessment, and our idea going forward of developing a community of practice for alternatives assessment. More and more states and others are doing alternatives assessments, and how can we help support that work, and how can folks out there, it's sort of how do we make this as collaborative and mutually supporting as possible. Then for the Safer Product Labeling Program, I want to tell you about how we incorporate green chemistry there, how we set the standards for our label, why we think that this is a good approach, and then what's coming from that program, the safer chemicals that are actually being used, obviously by product manufacturers, but those that are being developed by the folks who make chemicals, the invention of new, safer chemicals that can be used in products. So jump on to multi-stakeholder products. Alternatives assessment, safer product labeling, but we've also got a life cycle assessment going on right now. This is the only mention in this presentation of our life cycle assessment work, but we're doing an LCA for the batteries in hybrid electric and plug-in electric vehicles with some nanotech involved in that process. And this is all about looking at those batteries and figuring out where the difficult spots are in the life cycle of those batteries, so that the manufacturers can think about how to produce those in a way that uses the least toxic chemicals, but also reduces the energy in production. So let's go to alternatives assessment. And what is a chemical alternatives assessment? I'm guessing that quite a few of you were here a month or two ago when we're on a previous call of Lynn's a couple of months ago when Ken Geiser presented on alternatives assessment. And Ken actually has developed a definition for alternatives assessment, which I think of in broad terms. This is about the broad range of activities that can go on in alternatives assessment. That is not just the chemical hazard focused alternatives assessment that we do, and this where it says broadly on your screens, that's basically the definition that Ken developed. Specifically for DFE, if you want, you can take a look on our website about the 7 steps that we lay out for what we think a chemical alternatives assessment should be. But it involves the most important step, convening of stakeholders. But it also involves looking at what are the potential alternatives out there, and you would do that through literature search, and then more importantly, sort of my view is that a literature search and agency expertise are the starting point, but that you build on that by talking to the folks in industry and others in the community who are influencers about what are the potential alternatives out there, what's functional, what's not, what other materials might be considered. Once you understand what those are, you evaluate them based on a methodology that I can explain in just a moment here. But basically, it's high, moderate, and low ratings for a range of human health and environmental effects, and displayed in a way that people can understand. And then we provide that information to folks so that they can choose the safest possible chemicals. And frankly, providing the information that we put together, I think, is a very important thing for us to do, because it allows us to have an informed transition to alternative chemicals and helps avoid the potential pitfalls that you could end up with, MTBE-like situations where if you don't think about the full suite of potential concerns, you could end up going from risk shifting, really, and that's obviously not what we want. So just touching briefly on the priority chemicals that we're looking at right now, the agency has put out about 10 real families, I would call them, of chemicals, where we're focusing. It includes hundreds, actually, of chemicals that the agency has designated as priority chemicals. And for a subset of those, we are conducting alternatives assessments. And we chose the chemicals for alternatives assessment where we felt that DFE alternatives assessment could make a difference, could make a contribution, where we could either complement regulatory action, or, and by that I mean, say for decabromolethyl ether, for example, where there's a voluntary phase-out by the manufacturers. If DFE can look at the alternatives and show that there are functional alternatives that are out there that are likely to be safer, then the regulatory action that EPA would take in follow-up to a voluntary phase-out would be a more doable activity for the agency. It's important that we can make a demonstration that we're not making people go from a bad place to a worse place. And so this is the list of the alternatives assessments that we're doing, and you can look on our website, or if you're interested, I can provide more information to anybody who wants it about the status of all of these partnerships. These are all multi-stakeholder activities, and if folks want to participate and want to help us in conducting this work, we're very, very happy to have you. The endpoints that we look at when we do our alternatives assessment, our hazard criteria, looks at the endpoints that you can see here for human health, and on the left, and on the right, environmental fate, and then at the bottom, the additional things that we look at. And actually, where there's information, we will include endpoints, and we will, especially if they're differentiating. And what I mean by that is, say if you've got developmental neurotoxicity as an endpoint, which we do in our criteria, and there isn't data for a family of chemicals that you're looking at and evaluating, then it's not differentiating because you're not going to have data for those. Differentiating could also mean that for a given endpoint, such as persistence for polymers, for example, you're going to have consistent high ratings. That's not a differentiating endpoint either. You're looking for, if you're talking about solvents, you've got certain effects. And you want to look for solvents that minimize those effects, and so that would be a differentiating endpoint. You notice that endocrine activity is down here on our lists, and what we're interested in doing with all of our criteria, but endocrine activity is a good example, is that we want to be at the forefront of the science. We want to take advantage of science to the degree that it's available for us to use, but we can't get out in front of where the agency is on endocrine, for example. So what we're doing on endocrine is something that I think is a useful presentation of information. We actually present the information that's in the literature on endocrine activity for given chemicals that we look at. And we provide that level of information for all of the chemical alternatives, and we present it in a written form, but not we don't provide a high, moderate, or low rating. And that does provide information for folks who want to look and find it, what's the summary of what's out there on this chemical, but it doesn't go beyond that. It's also interesting, I think, at this point that for the chemicals that we're looking at, which are a lot of them are some of the most studied chemicals that are out there, you do find a small amount of information for endocrine activity. For our BPA alternatives assessment that we're doing right now, there's quite a bit of information out there on BPA, but for the alternatives, there's a minimum of information, and we don't want to fall into the trap of looking for our car keys in the light because that's the only place that we can see. You know, we want to look based on differentiating endpoints, of which endocrine, unfortunately, at this point, is not yet one. This is an example of how we present data. This is the alternatives assessment, the first one that we did for furniture foam. I use this one because it's simple. It uses a smaller set of endpoints than what you just saw on the previous page, but it is illustrative of the way that we do our work, which is to let me just explain how this chart lays out. On the left-hand column, you have the company who makes an alternative. Next, you have a trade name for these are alternatives to pentabromo diphenyl ether for use in low-density flexible polyurethane foam for furniture. So you have the company, you have the trade name for the product, and you can see that for Satex that there are 3 ingredients that would take the place of penta. And then if you go further out to the right, you see a set of human effects and ecotoxin, et cetera, laid out. And the data here laid out in terms of, or shown in terms of low, moderate, or high concern for hazard by endpoint, and the color, in color values, those green lows and the orange moderates and the red highs, those are based on actual test data. What I think is really one of the things that's very important, I think, is that our new chemicals program allows us for chemicals where there's very, very little data available. You see that that tetrabromophthaleate diol diester. That chemical was a new chemical at the time, new chemical through our new chemicals program. Studies had not yet been done on that chemical, but we were able to project model toxicity for that chemical based on new chemical program tools, and that's a very important thing because we don't want to be penalizing chemicals that have a great deal of data and allowing chemicals that are poorly understood to sail through any process. They should also be evaluated, and our tools allow us to do that. And I think that's a very important piece of our contribution, and frankly, why we're investing in this space. Now, growing community of practice, this is what I was talking about, that others now are conducting alternatives assessments, that you've got states like those listed, you've got NGOs who are very engaged, Clean Production Action doing some wonderful work with companies and states and others about how do you take basically the methodology that I was just talking about, make it more accessible to other people, and figure out how people without the resources of EPA's New Chemicals program at their disposal could actually fill gaps in data. Actually today, it's kind of interesting, tomorrow, Jim Jones, who leads the Toxics and Pesticides program, is in California signing an MOU with the California Department of Toxic Substances Control over alternatives assessment and data sharing that should help with implementation of their green chemistry initiative. And I just wrote examples of companies and trade associations that are also engaged. And this is an incredibly incomplete list. This was just a couple seconds of writing things down. This is not intended to be comprehensive, so I apologize to anyone who's not here. Now, there's an important piece of information about outcome of our alternatives assessments, I think. First of all, we do these alternatives assessments, and sometimes we can identify chemicals that are safer than the priority chemicals that they may replace. But often, though, you end up with trade-offs. You end up with trading off human health effects for effects associated with environmental concerns, and the range of trade-offs is more broad. I can't imagine the number of permutations and combinations, but you get the idea, I'm sure. And sometimes there's just not a better choice. And where that's the case, either of those two second points, I think a big contribution could be made through use of our methodology to identify what you're looking for in a green chemistry challenge. You could say, okay, for this particular set of chemicals, this audience, you probably are all aware that often toxicology follows functionality, and that if you're talking about surfactants, for example, a substitute for one surfactant is going to be another surfactant that likely has similar toxicological profile. And what you're looking for here is how do you differentiate the safer chemicals in that class? What are the differentiating characteristics? And for surfactants, I think I'm talking about that later still, for surfactants, that's probably the rate of biodegradation. But for a flame retardant, it could be something completely different, like a neurological developmental effect. And you want to avoid those, and that kind of information can contribute to putting together a green chemistry challenge. And I really think that might be a way the future, and a sort of a great service that we can provide to industry and to academia. In terms of what is it that's needed and what are the priority needs for innovation in green chemistry. So let me jump now to Safer Product Labeling Program. Let me see if I can speak a little more quickly or just go more quickly through this presentation. So our label, the Safer Product Labeling Program, we have taken that program that was very, very hazard focused and broadened it a little bit in the last few years so that beyond human health and environmental effects, we also look at other aspects of what is a safer program, a safer product, especially in the cleaning and detergent areas. What we've got is a standard that looks at the whole product, but importantly for us, it looks at the whole product. It looks at, in terms of its toxicological potential effects, it looks at product performance. We require audits, and there is ingredient disclosure that will be required coming up in the next year, but that most of our partners are already doing. 500 plus partners are already doing. I think that's a pretty important innovation. You can see a little example on the right hand of the screen here from Clean Control, one of our partners. But what's really important for us is our focus still on the toxicological profiles of the chemicals that are in the products, and only the safest per class of chemical is allowed in our products. So the standard says what's not allowed. There are obviously, for me, there are obviously no PBTs or CMRs in our products. Importantly, though, the products, or rather the chemicals that are in products, we don't just look at listed chemicals. We look at every single chemical, and we look at the structure of the chemical. And using new chemical program tools, if there's a chemical that has these chemicals, we think of them as having, we call it moieties, but these are little branches, bits and pieces of these chemicals. And some of the moieties are associated with effects of concern, and so that we look at chemical structures before we allow chemicals in our products. And if those chemical structures are associated with concerns, we don't allow them in our product. And then the other thing, the other angle that I think is important, and this is really the focus of what we do, is that we want people to use the safest ingredients that are possible. And we don't, we say, yes, none of these bad chemicals, none of these listed chemicals, no chemicals that look like the listed chemicals, but also this is what a safer ingredient is by this ingredient class, and we define that. And I believe that that we're the only folks who do that by toxicological criteria. And so it's not a blacklist, but a green list of chemicals. And I think that's an approach that I really like, and to be able to talk about the positive, and to be able to talk about the positive of chemical manufacturers and product manufacturers is a really important part of our program, and that's what we try to focus on. We also have data requirements to meet to show that the chemicals are better, and lack of data is, sorry, can't use that chemical in a product. And suppliers develop safer chemicals and test data. I think I've got another slide on this, so I'm going to skip that point right now. Here, I just want to show you this. This is really interesting to me. I think that I'm guessing most of the people on the phone are very familiar with the drivers for safer products in the industrial sector, and that state procurement programs, LEED Green Buildings, and so forth drive the use of safer products. But on the consumer side, there's some interesting data here that shows that the first data with those parallelograms, they're not even that, but whatever they are, the shapes along the top show that for folks who are leaving a grocery store, 95% wanted the person who was asking them the question to believe that they were looking for green products when they were in the store, or that they would be interested in buying them, and 63 actually looked for them, and 22% of those folks pointed to something in their cart that they thought was a safer choice. And then the other thing, the 65% related to the government's role, and then the importance of toxins and chemicals from this third study. I mean, all this together says to me that consumers are becoming increasingly interested in this sector and are increasingly going to be a driver. I mean, I would say that Walmart, Home Depot, and many others have been big and important drivers for the green chemistry innovation in consumer products over the last 3 or 4 years. But that I'm interested in what's going to happen as we come back from this recession right now, and what sorts of things we're going to see in terms of consumers driving the market. This is our program. This is you can see back in 6 and 7 is the time frame when Walmart and then others started encouraging their product suppliers to move toward greener chemicals and to work with us. And you can see the growth that's been driven. You can see though that that the lion's share of the products at DFE are still in the industrial and institutional area. But these numbers represent about 500 manufacturers, many of whom make products, but it also includes those who are private labelers and those who simply distribute or label other people's goods. So we have definitions, like I was mentioning just a moment ago, definitions of safer chemicals by functional use class, and that what's happened in response to that, we really thought it was important to define safer chemicals by use class, because here at EPA it's important that we don't just say what you can't do, but say what you can do, and that's a much more effective way to approach a program like ours than, talking about good things is much better than talking about bad things. And so that's why we focused our program that way. But I don't know how many of you know Lauren Hine from Clean Production Action. At the time she was at Green Blue, she developed something called the Clean Ingredients Database. And Clean Ingredients houses safer alternatives that meet our criteria for safer surfactants, for safer solvents, for safer chelants. And there are hundreds of chemicals there now that many of which industry, Dow, DuPont, et cetera, have invented specifically families of chemicals that meet, for example, our surfactants criteria. And encouraging that kind of development of green chemistry is something that here at DFE we're very, very proud of. We've also driven development of new test data so that folks can demonstrate that they meet our screens, which is another important development, I think, to differentiate chemicals.
We just wanted to tack on to Clive's presentation, because in the region, at least for Region 5, and this is happening a bit in Region 2 in their TSCA program, more and more companies are looking to make greener decisions as well, just like consumers at the store. And we wanted to highlight that while at the national level DFE is focused on certain chemicals, that doesn't mean that companies can't approach their regional offices to work on alternatives assessments of their own for their specific sector or their specific place of work. So we just wanted to highlight that, if you see a project you'd really like to work on and are looking to build something that could be used at DFE in the future, we would be glad to work with you, either in the Region 5 TSCA program or in our Great Lakes National Program Office as well. Both of our programs have toxics reduction, green chemistry, and alternatives analysis opportunities. We as the region don't develop alternatives assessments. We leave that either to DFE or the states in question, or the industry associations in many cases. But we're really seeking to outreach to small and mid-sized businesses, really sector-specific activities, and emerging substances and risks that either trade associations, states, or locals have identified, as well as looking at voluntary best practices at the same time. We see a lot of opportunities out there. We're currently working with 2 different sector associations on sector-specific green chemistry and sustainability challenges of their own. And for others on the phone who are looking to start a project or maybe build something small, we'd be glad to work with you as well as the DFE program in the future in helping you build something that works for your sector or chemical or mixture or formulation, whatever it would be. Clive, next slide. And we just wanted to highlight that there are contacts in the region if you're a small business or a mid-sized business or a trade association who's just looking to get started. You're maybe not at the point yet where you have a lot of data, but you're looking for places to start. We'd be glad to help you in looking at the DFE criteria and getting started on either life cycle thinking, if you're not at the analysis stage, or also in looking at products within the DFE program that could be suitable alternatives. So looking toward that green list and finding opportunities. We'd also be glad to work with you on any other collaborations that you're looking for. And we left our contact information on the screen. If you're in the Great Lakes Basin, it's Ted. And if you're looking to do more specifically with the TSCA program with DFE, but more of a TSCA focus, a chemicals focus as a supplier or manufacturer, feel free to give me a call. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Well, that was a terrific presentation, and we still have 20 minutes left for questions and comments. So if you would like to ask one of our speakers a question, please type it out in the box that's on your screen. And while we're waiting for some questions to come up, I would just like to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I want to encourage you to check our website for our upcoming webinars. We have a really great schedule planned for 2012 with, on Wednesday, February 15th, we're going to have a webinar entitled Labor and Environmental Health Activists Build Alliances to Promote Green Chemistry with Tolly Graham, who's the Labor and Environment Coordinator for the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health, and Ed Collins, who's the Executive Vice President, Industrial Sector for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Massachusetts. I think this is going to be a great presentation and will give us a whole new perspective or a different perspective coming from the workers' viewpoint. And so I really encourage you to come. In March, we've invited Dr. Miodovnik from Mount Sinai School of Medicine, who is a specialist in neurodevelopmental outcomes in children associated with chemical exposures occurring early in life. And in April, we're very fortunate to have Timothy Kapsner, who's with the Aveda Corporation, and Kathleen Schuler, who's the co-director of an organization called Healthy Legacy at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. And they're going to talk about the Minnesota Green Chemistry Forum, which is happening on the 26th of this month. And you can find details about that on our website. You can also find details about an upcoming call with Lisa Jackson, Administrator of US EPA, that's being sponsored by the American Sustainable Business Council. That information is on our website as well. And I just want to tell you to keep watch at our website for an announcement of our Green Chemistry Conference, which will be held in November of 2012 in Chicago under a grant from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative with the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable, the Great Lakes Regional Pollution Prevention Roundtable, Region 5, and the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network. I'd also like to direct you to the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable's 2025 Safer Chemistry Challenge, which you can find at www.p2.org, which follows right along with the discussion that we've been having today. So, to go to the questions, trying to...
So, Lynn, while you're getting that together, I'll read the first question while you're getting ready. The first question is a simple one. There's a question from Richard Kroc asking if Clive and his team are prepared to make a copy of this presentation available.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So for all of you,
Vin, would it be all right for Lynn to send that, because I don't have everyone's information?
Yes. So,
sure.
I mean, basically just let everyone know that generally what we do is you'll find a video recording of this webinar, so you can actually not only see the presentation, but you can re-listen to the presentation on the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network's website. But we will also email out a PDF version of the presentation to anyone that's interested. But you can also find a PDF version of the presentation on the webinar page of the Michigan Green Chemistry Clearinghouse.
Great. So I have a question. In the Northeast, we see many of the state and municipal purchasing programs requiring either Green Seal or Ecologic or Ecologo certification. What is the DFE stance on this? Is anyone else running into this problem? We would like to team up with DFE, but need to meet market requirements.
So yeah, thanks for that. And I did want to mention that, pardon me, that Bridget Williams, who leads our outreach program, is here with me now, and that Cal Bear Anderson, who is doing our alternative assessments for bisphenol A and phthalates, is in the room as well, just in case there are questions on those two. But yeah, that's an interesting question, and I would say that I would say that, you know, we encourage and certainly understand that that there are these requirements out there, and that folks need to do what they need to do to comply. But that we are working with states around the country, and in some cases with our regional offices, to make sure that folks understand what the requirements of the program are and the value of the program. And that we're currently, there are, I think, getting toward about 20 states with EPP programs, and that the DFE is specified in 10 of those. And if the questioner or anyone else would like to have a conversation with us, I'm available, and Bridget Williams, who's at 202-564-8558, is also available to talk with you about that.
Our next question is, one of the challenging things about green chemistry is the fact that there are numerous programs out there. I am curious about how EPA's DFE program is different than the clean ingredient databases.
Ah, okay. No, that's a great question. So, so the Clean Ingredients database hosted by Green Blue, what that does is it actually takes the screens for safer ingredients that DFE has developed for chelants and solvents and surfactants, for example, and allows chemical manufacturers rather to list the chemicals that meet the screen. Those chemicals are run by, how do I say this more clearly? They are evaluated by EPA, DFE, qualified third parties, and if there is data that show that those chemicals meet our criteria, then they can be listed in the Clean Ingredients database, and then they can be used in DFE products. And product manufacturers often take ingredients from that list and use those in products. We see that increasingly as the number of chemicals on Clean Ingredients increases. And from the viewpoint of product manufacturers, it's very attractive to take chemicals from Clean Ingredients, because they get a break on the price. Unfortunately, the DFE doesn't work directly with product manufacturers. We have qualified third parties who do a first review of products before they're sent to us, and they get a break on the price that they're charged for that review, if they are using Clean ingredients.
Next question is, I'm from Toronto, Ontario, home of the first Canadian right-to-know legislation for priority substances, use and release to air. I'm wondering if the community of practice extends into Canada, and if so, who are you working with in the Great Lakes region?
So, that's fantastic, and fantastic question, and thank you. And so this community of practice idea is something that we're in the process of investing in and coming up with, and exactly how that's going to take shape, I'm not sure at this point, but we've had, a few months ago, we had a meeting with other regulators in states and localities about our program and others who do alternative assessment, and we want to do that. We want to do that more, and I think that maybe one thing that we could do is have a conversation about your ideas about how what would be valuable to you in a community of practice. I mean, would it be valuable for you to hear about the technical innovations of others and others' tools and how they do things and so forth? And then, what about the network of people who do this kind of work? But having Toronto involved, having Canada involved broadly, but having Toronto involved would be a fantastic thing for us, and we'd like to work with you.
I have a question that asks if EPA can provide us a copy of this presentation, and I just want to reiterate that this entire presentation is being taped, is being recorded, and will be posted on the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network website at glgc.org. It'll take a couple of days probably. We're just updating the website, but you will be able to get the entire presentation at our website, and including the slides. So just so that you know. Any other questions here? I have we've plenty of time, and I really encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to talk directly with Clive Davies and Brad Grams from EPA.
So, Lynn, there's a request if Clive could please repeat the phone number for Bridget.
I will. It's 202-564-8558. It's only different from the one that is up there on the screen now for me in the last 4 digits, and those 4 digits are 8558. Also, Bridget has asked me to mention that DFE has a Facebook page, and if you want updates on an ongoing basis about DFE, please go to our Facebook page, which you can find by just typing in DFE EPA, and it'll come up.
Yes, Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network also has a Facebook page, which we're trying to keep current, and which we encourage you to like and to post things to. I have another question here. Could you please say a bit more about the memorandum the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, you are signing with the California Department of Toxic Substances Control? What will it cover? When will it take effect? Will it connect DTSC to things beyond DFE?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Cal Bear Anderson, who's here with me, is working with me on that, and our Office of Research and Development. And the first thing is that there are a number of areas of focus in the Memorandum of Understanding. One is about sharing information as California prioritizes chemicals and then products for consideration under their Green Chemistry Initiative. It includes development of guidance for alternatives assessment, which we're looking forward very much to contributing to. And actually, we're working now with Washington State as they work on a guidance on alternatives assessment, and we're pleased to be part of that effort as well. It also involves sharing of our ACTOR. Our Office of Research and Development has an ACTOR database. ACTOR is just a short name for it, but it includes information on hazard of chemicals and will tie into the computational tox work there. And I'm going to be quiet about that. I'm going to let Cal augment what I say here when I finish. And then training on green chemistry and engineering, and the MOU contemplates the idea that we would work with California in green chemistry, green engineering, DFE, and then the tools that our Office of Research and Development has that include some life cycle tools. But life cycle tools, frankly, I think importantly come out of our little organization here in OPPT, Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics as well. Would you like to augment, Cal?
There's not much more to add. I think Clive basically covered it all. that just to make clear that there are, we're engaged in all these efforts currently here at EPA, in DFE, in ORD, and California is on a similar trajectory. So really the MOU just makes it a little easier to exchange information, tools, and training while we each carry out our mandates.
Actually, I think one thing that would be really interesting for you to say is just a word or two about high-throughput screening and what's going on with that. Would you be willing?
Sure, sure. Okay, so once again, this is Cal Bayer Anderson, and over in the Office of Research and Development, there's a computational toxicology effort that's ongoing, and I think there's a lot of interest on the part of those of us who access and use hazard data to characterize chemicals to see what high-throughput screening could do to help us rapidly assess chemicals. And so one aspect of the California MOU would be to explore perhaps case studies where we might be able to bring to the table traditional toxicological information and high-throughput data to see how it can be used to inform our understanding of chemical hazard and advanced thinking in toxicology.